Hi everyone, I'm the Plant Propagator and welcome to my channel. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about what I do, please subscribe to my channel. Today I am out in front of my house in Southwest Florida, and if you hear some street traffic coming up and down the street, well, that's why. Today what I want to talk to you about is orchids, timing and rhythm. And so the first question is, can orchids tell time? And then the second question is, do orchids have rhythm? And what I want to do is kind of give you some examples and explain to you a little bit about the timing and rhythm that orchids do have. So the answer to both of those questions is absolutely. So what I want to do is first talk about the timing and, more importantly, the timing of orchid flowering. So right here, close to me, I have a Phalaenopsis, and the Phalaenopsis is a large Phalaenopsis at the bottom of this date palm, and this is the first flower, not quite open yet, but pretty close. And it's opening up, and it's got a large number of flower spikes on it. So it's the Phalaenopsis that I have here. I also have some Phalaenopsis on the date palm right there, and they're in spike. And then I have Phalaenopsis, all of my Phalaenopsis in my backyard are also putting out bloom spikes. All right, so they all have the ability, and they all bloom. All of these, at least, that I have bloom the same time of the year. Down here, you can't see it. I'll pull it into view a little bit, but here's some Dendrobiums that are also blooming. I've got some dens behind me on this tree that are finished blooming, so Dendrobiums are a little bit different. And so these Dendrobiums, sometimes they'll bloom different times of the year. A lot of these guys are kind of continuous blooming, but I do have a Dendrobium cruminatum that I have. I have one on a tree in front of my house, and I have another on a tree behind my house. And they're really fragrant, small white blooms. And these bloom only for a really short period of time. The interesting thing is, they'll bloom a short period of time means a couple of days. And the interesting thing is I have the orchid that was in the front of my house and the orchid that's behind my house bloom the same day. They open the same day. And it's like, okay, this is interesting. So even though they're in different parts of the yard, they bloom on the same day. So they do have the ability to tell time. I got one more example for you. So over here is an orchid that's Momilani Rainbow, and it is just loaded. So I'm having a shower of Momilani Rainbow on this tree, and if you take a look at that tree over there, the same orchid is there. So that's another Momilani. I have a lot of Momilani Rainbow, and the reason for this is the first plant that I received about 15 or 20 years ago as a gift, and it grew up. I divided it. It grew up more. I divided it. So I've got a lot of plants of Momilani Rainbow. And so these plants are blooming. I have plants that are in the back of my house that also have bloom spikes. And so they're all blooming at the same time. So, this is really interesting. And the question is, why? Why are they doing this? Well, orchids and plants in general have photoreceptors. So they can tell the day length. They can kind of give they have an idea what's going on. And they really are very good and very consistent bloomers. So a lot of the orchids, and I keep records, and I suggest you keep records of your orchids as well, but kind of keep a track of bloom time, and you'll find that your orchids will bloom the same time of the year from year to year. Occasionally I have some of my cattleyas that will bloom twice a year, and those twice a year bloomers also bloom pretty much the same months from year to year. So orchids, again, have the ability, they can sense the day length, they have the appropriate photoreceptors that are in the leaves, and other plants do this as well, and they can pretty much determine what time of the year that it is. The photoreceptors that are in the plants that will determine the day length, they're also impacted by temperature. So sometimes if it's warm, things will bloom a little bit early, and sometimes if it's cold, things will bloom a little late. But mostly you'll get the consistent bloom time of your orchids and of other plants from year to year. Okay, why is this happening? What is the reason that plants bloom at the same time? And think about it, and what would happen if the plants of a certain type would bloom at different times of the year. And so it's evolutionarily, it's an advantage to have these plants bloom at the same time while the flowers are open. At the same time of the year, it's a higher chance of them getting pollinated. So there is a evolutionary reason that plants in general and that orchids bloom at the same time every year. Now with orchids, you kind of wonder, okay, what happens if I have orchids that sometimes bloom in January and sometimes bloom in March? And this is because of where they come from. And so orchids, you want all the orchids within a certain population that bloom at the same time, so that they can again get hybridization. But the reality of this is most of the orchids that we have in our collections, the source of those orchids are quite varied. But within a certain plant type, they'll all bloom pretty much at the same time of the year, give or take a little bit, depending on the temperature. So what I suggest that you do is, again, take notes of when your orchids are blooming so you have an idea of when they're going to bloom. And again, might vary a little bit from month to month, but kind of take notes and kind of understand when your orchids are going to bloom. All right, so that's all I have for today. I do want you to think a little bit more about this, and I also want to end with another question, and that is, can orchids and plants in general communicate? And so I guess there's other questions that are involved in, and you hear questions about, well, can orchids, do they benefit from music, and what kind of music? And I can pretty much answer that with one word, and that is no. But the other question is, can orchids communicate? And the answer to that question is yes, or more importantly, absolutely. So they communicate by different methods than we do, but I don't want to go into that right now. That's for another video coming up. So that's all I have for today. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about what I do, please subscribe to my channel, and happy propagating.